All right, so slide one background. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 was a direct confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This conflict was the moment when two countries of power came closest to nuclear conflict. Um, okay, here's some other bullet points. It stands as a singular event during the Cold War that strengthened President John F. Kennedy's image worldwide. It also helped mitigate negative opinions regarding the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. This also was the hottest point of the Cold War. Years later, information was revealed that the crisis could have easily been deteriorated into a nuclear exchange. Several Soviet military generals were authorized to use nuclear weapons on their own accord, making President Kennedy's handling of the crisis it made it look very judicious. Um, okay, so slide two background. Um, there was fighting in Cuba a couple of years before the U.S. intervened in 1959. Cuba was a Spanish colony in the 1900s. Um, let's see, Cuba became independent after the Spanish-American War. The U.S. and Soviet Union established diplomatic relations in 1933. All throughout World War II, although World War II brought Um, although World War II brought the two countries into alliance, not even before the war ended, some tension was created. The US and Soviet Union stayed far apart for the next 3 decades and had a nuclear and missile arms race. All right. Okay, how and why the US became involved, part one. How? After Castro became parallel to the Soviet Union, Cuba had grown dependent on the Soviets' military and economic aid. The two superpowers entered a huge Cold War confrontation, and at this time, a man named Richard Haser had gone over Cuba in high altitude and took a photo of a Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missile. He brought it to President Kennedy, where he decided on creating a naval blockade. Okay. Um, why? So the naval blockade that President Kennedy wanted to create essentially was to ensure national security for the U.S. With the missiles being so close. Um, the naval blockade was a ring of ships that would be surrounding Cuba, almost like trapping it, essentially. Um, okay, how and why the Soviet Union became involved. So, why? So because the Soviet Union considered Cuba a source of propaganda, and both nations saw value in influencing people's opinions through it, the Soviet Union was willing to invest a good deal of money into Cuba's military efforts. Oops. Oh no. Okay, throughout the time that these two nations were working collectively, the Soviet Union invested over $1.7 billion on remodeling and constructing Cuban factories, as well as another 750 million a year in military assistance. So we know that the Soviet Union invested a lot of money into Cuba, so supported Cuba financially in many different ways. Um, Okay, how and why the Soviet Union became involved, part two. So Cuba relied heavily on the Soviet Union for trading, um, which accounted for around 70% of Cuba's overall trade. Both nations were codependent on each other because the Soviet Union needed to get close to the United States, and Cuba relied on the Soviet Union for trading as well as general financial support. Um, Hotspot 1, Bay of Pigs invasion. Okay, so the Central Intelligence Agency, the Kennedy administration, um, the American trained Cuban exiles and Fidel Castro and its army were involved. Um, uh, Task for the U.S. Overthrow Fidel Castro from leadership in Cuba. The U.S. wanted a non-communist Cuba and a friendly relationship. Um, the 1,400 exiled Cubans wanted to free their country and were trained by America for combat. Um, The fight was impossible to begin with, and the war did not even last 24 hours. Fidel Castro was victorious in this battle. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. I created a little quiz, 4 questions, if you want to take it. And thanks for listening.